So again, my name is Lee Byron. I'm the director at IFAS Extension and Sustainability in Sarasota County. And I want to share with you a unique program called Property Assessed Clean Energy. It's a financing program that is available in Sarasota County, but and is also available elsewhere in the state and across the country. But I'll share what's unique here in Sarasota. So I know some of you may be joining from Sarasota County. So if that's true, please put that in the chat box. I can think about what other context to share with you that way. So the class will try to cover what are we talking about? What is PACE? What happens in Sarasota County? What specific things qualify for PACE? And then dig into the how it works, because it is kind of complicated. We'll talk about how it works for residents, how it works for condos, as well as the benefits and the risks. It is very, I am a neutral party on this. The county is not an advocate. We just had to enable it as part of the legislation. So we do this education to be sure that people who might be considering it understand all of the pros and cons. As I said, we had to enable it, so we'll talk about what our enabling policy outlines and requires. And then I will also talk about some other financing tools, because PACE is just one of many options for financing things like solar that you all are interested in. So with that, I will get started. So what is PACE? PACE is a financing tool that allows both commercial and residential property owners to finance specific things. Those things can only be related to energy or hurricane improvements. So it's within those two categories, and it is repaid through an assessment on your property taxes. So it's not technically a loan, it's a financing assessment that goes on your property taxes. It is voluntary for property owners. So unlike other tax assessments where you have to pay for the lighting in your community, this one is voluntary. You opt in if you choose to do one of these projects. It was first enabled in Florida in 2010, and our program here in Sarasota County was approved in 2018. It is a combination of two types of organizations are the ones that implement it. The PACE local governments, these are actually separate local government entities that create districts specifically for this purpose. They're the ones that issue the bonds and finance the projects, but they bring in third-party administrators that are for-profit organizations that actually implement the program on behalf of those districts. And those that are active in our community are listed there. Nationally, there are 20 states that have PACE enabled, and only 3 of those states allow residential PACE. Most of them are commercial only currently. Florida has PACE in over 20 counties and many jurisdictions in addition to that. This is a little bit of what the map looked like a couple years ago. I haven't gotten an updated version of this. They stopped creating this kind of map, but it gives you a sense of where things are happening and in which stages they were. So what happened here in Sarasota County is we started talking about it as soon as the state enabled it, really before, but it took a long time for the county to get comfortable enough with it to move it forward here, because it really was a slow developing program. We passed our ordinance, the board passed their ordinance in October of 2017, and then we did these interlocal agreements with the 4 PACE providers in July of 2018. They then had to do a couple more steps, provide their agreements with property appraiser and tax collector, and our cities. We have 4 cities. They opted in by January of 2019. So we now have an active program as of January 2019, and we have specific compliance requirements in all of those documents that I'll talk about later. So I mentioned these are the 4 providers in Sarasota County that are active. Our website that I'll show you at the end has direct links to each of these, and that'll give you an easy way to do some research on your own. But they also have relationships with the contractors, which we'll talk about in a minute, and that's really often how people get connected to them. All of our cities have opted in, although there are some limitations on which providers are in each city. So Renew Financial is not currently available in Longboat Key, and Fortify and PACE Equity are not fully eligible within the city of Sarasota. So I mentioned earlier, it's only specific categories of work. So energy efficiency by state statute is allowed. The kinds of projects you might see are air conditioning, insulation, pool pumps, but it also covers electric vehicle charging stations, which is specifically outlined in the statute. Renewable energy, like solar that you've mentioned, solar hot water or solar photovoltaic, and wind resistance. So that's the hurricane component of this, and that's unique in Florida. Hurricane resistant roofing and shutters and windows and that kind of thing. So I noticed that one of you is interested in hurricane windows. The most common products in Florida have been that hurricane category. So mostly windows and roofs. And then the next most common is air conditioning upgrades and efficiency improvements. The items have to be permanent on the property, and they can't be more than 20% of the property's value. So I mentioned earlier that most of the projects in Florida are hurricane protection. This is a chart on specific types of projects in Florida to give you a sense. Only 2% of the Florida projects at that time were solar, but mostly windows, roofs, and air conditioning. So why does Sarasota County care about this? We have a longstanding effort related to energy and sustainability. And energy costs are on average about $1,200 a year for Sarasota County households, but that adds up to almost $300 million being spent each year. And if some of that could be saved through reduced waste in homes and commercial buildings, that's more value that those property owners can add to their own properties, their lives, and really our local economy. We also have data that shows that low-income families pay more per square foot because their homes are less efficient. And so we really want to address that energy inequity approach. In terms of solar, our community does not have a large adoption of solar. And so we would like to improve upon that. The number of installations each year has been going up, but it's not a lot. And so anything that we can do to help encourage additional solar and additional efficiency is really helpful. And then I'm sure anyone who lives in Florida understands that we are very susceptible to hurricanes. This was a record year again. One of the storms that did hit Sarasota County was Hurricane Irma, but it came in as a tropical storm. So the maximum sustained winds were only 48 miles per hour, but it did have significant impact. 83% of our community lost power. Over 20,000 people were in shelters. And 438 homes had impact of damage. And so we had a lot of interest after that storm in how can I get hurricane shutters, how can I get new windows. All of that came to our office, and we said, well, you know, it's important to be doing that, but a lot of these people are having trouble paying for it. So the PACE program is one option that we'll talk about. So how does it work? The first step for a property owner would be to get quotes for those qualifying improvements from contractors. And we always recommend you get at least 3 quotes, diversify your contractors, do your research on who those people are. And also in parallel, you want to research your financing options. You want to ask the contractors themselves what kind of financing they have access to or they offer. Also reach out to your banks and do your research so that you know what's best for you in order to finance those improvements. If after that research, you choose PACE, then you would do a financing agreement with the PACE provider, and the contractor would only be paid by that PACE provider after you sign off on the work. And then the property owner pays their PACE assessment once per year through a non-ad valorem line item on their property taxes. If they are participating in escrow, then they need to work with their bank to get it added to their escrow, and then it's handled that way. But that is an extra step that can often take some more time. So people need to be prepared to have that line item on their property taxes. It really is a public-private partnership. The PACE districts have that relationship with the PACE providers. The county has established the program and set the rules, but we are not a part of the program ourselves. So it's just an enabling role for the county, and also to make sure that they follow those rules. So that's part of what we do in my office, is to check in with them and to listen for concerns. But it's those PACE providers that have the relationship with with both the contractors as well as the property owners. So this is a sample property tax bill from Sarasota County's tax collector, and it would normally include the ad valorem taxes at the top and the non-ad valorem in that middle box. And if you zoom down in the bottom there, you see that if there were a PACE assessment added, it would be another line item in that middle box. It would list the PACE provider and the amount that you were expected to pay per year. So to give you a sense of what we're talking about, I asked the PACE providers for some example financing scenarios. So these are what they gave me. I think they're over a year old now. So the numbers certainly could change, but I wanted to just walk you through all of the numbers to consider. So if someone were doing a solar photovoltaic installation, it may cost $25,000, just as an example. The annual PACE assessment from Y-Green, which is one of the providers, for that amount would have been just over $3,000 per year. So that's what that line item on your tax bill would look like. They would finance that for 20 years at an interest rate of 7.99%. And they would have an additional set of program fees of about $1,280. So when all that adds up together, the total amount they would finance, including fees and project costs, would be $29,800. The total payments over those 20 years, including interest, would add up to $60,000. So it's important to know that the cost of capital, that long-term interest rate addition, really does add up over those 20 years. That's not picking on PACE. That's true for any financing scheme you would look at. But it's important to remember that it's always cheaper to pay cash. And it's very important to think about what those interest rates are. So also we asked about what would happen if someone wanted to pay it off early. We made sure that for residential PACE, there is no penalty for early payment. There may be in commercial. So if anyone's thinking about that, you need to make sure that that's clear up front. But for residential, there can be prepayments, but if you do it partially, if you sort of get enough money in a certain year and you want to pay it down, you have to do it at certain amounts. So they won't let you prepay anything less than $2,500. So that's an important consideration. Sometimes on mortgages, people will pay an extra $20 or $100 here and there. That's not allowed within the PACE programs that I'm aware of. So you have to have these minimum prepayment amounts. Renew PACE is another one that gave an example. So the same $25,000 solar system would have a 25-year assessment through Renew PACE. The other one was 20. And so in this case, the annual payment would be $2,300. Their interest rates is 6.99%, a little bit lower. Their fees are $1,100. The tax collector cost recovery, which is allowed by statute, and all of them are going to pass this on to you in some way, is about 2%. They've got some other fees and capitalized interest and all those things. So the total amount that they would be financing up front is just over $26,000. The total payments for that is $59,391. So this one has a longer term and a lower interest rate and gets you to $59,000. This one was a shorter term and a higher interest rate at about the same amount. So that shows you those are really the two considerations, right? How long am I paying for this and how much am I being charged for the money? On a smaller cost project, a window replacement, I know some of you are considering that. We have an example of $10,000 of windows. The PACE assessment for this with a 10-year term would be $1,757 per year. Their interest rate is 7.49. They've got the various program fees. So that makes your total financed amount at $12,000, and the total payments over those 10 years adds up to $17,500. Okay. And I should say at the beginning, I will send you these slides so you don't need to be understanding the full details now. You can reference them when it's time to be thinking about it. Another example at the $10,000 amount, their annual assessment is $1,600 for that 10-year term. A 7.14% interest rate gets you to a total amount financed of just over $11,000 and a total payments of $16,000. So that's some sort of wonky financial details, but that's the kind of thing we want people to be paying attention to make sure they understand the full cost of any financing that they enter into. All right, so I mentioned earlier, condos are a unique situation, and they actually haven't been very tested in the PACE world yet. But what I've been told when I've asked about this is that if the items that you're replacing are the individual owner's responsibility, sort of inside the condo, then it's the same thing as if you were doing it in a single family home. It's the individual owner that would have the relationship with the contractor and with the financing organization. For you, if you're considering solar for your condo as a whole, so you wanted to put solar on for the organization, that's different, right? So that, or roofs that are almost always commonly owned by the association, that's where it gets more complicated. So they have considered whether they would do it as a commercial PACE financing, where the relationship is with the association as a commercial entity. So that's one option. Another option, particularly for windows, is they've considered even assigning ownership to the individual units, because that could allow it to happen more quickly. They just don't have much experience doing things with condo associations. That's not to say they can't, but what after answering these many back and forths with me, they basically said, please contact them, talk it through with them, your specific situation, and they would work with you. So condos are much more complicated, but could be possible. So for the contractors, if any of you are a contractor or just want to understand how it works for them, they do need to get trained by the PACE provider on this financing tool. We require that in our rules. And then they are approved by the PACE provider based on their insurance and that kind of thing. They then offer the PACE financing to their customers, and hopefully they have other financing available as well, and they can sort of show multiple options. And as I said, they're paid after the customer signs off on the completion of the project. They do have to follow a code of conduct that the PACE providers develop, and they really, from our perspective, have to be careful about how they market this program. We don't want them to be out there saying that PACE is something that it's not, and that has happened in other communities. So we were careful to require that in our program rules. So what are the benefits of PACE, the pros? It is, as I said, supporting this hurricane preparedness, environmental protection, energy efficiency for our community as a whole. It also could have possible economic development benefits by allowing projects that might not happen otherwise. That's the bottom part, and that has benefits to our contractors, but it also could help save on utility and insurance bills, which is something that the PACE providers definitely talk about. The insurance bills from the hurricane preparedness improvements are, I think, something to ask your contractor about. You're not always going to get those insurance reductions, but ask them, and then ask your insurance company what might be possible. The market impact nationwide of PACE is significant. Residential has a higher dollar amount, but commercial projects are larger per project, as you might expect. So what's happened here in Sarasota County? The latest data we had was as of a nearly complete year in 2019. And at that point, there had been 212 projects completed in Sarasota County for a total of over $3 million. So it adds up. There's a lot of projects being done through PACE. This was only with the 2 providers, and additional providers have been added since then. So we're working on getting that data updated. So the benefits to the property owner directly, there is this sort of contractor management component that when you go directly to a contractor, you don't have that third party that has the code of conduct, does a little bit of training, checks their qualifications. It depends on how rigorous that process is, but it is an extra step that you don't have when you're doing it yourself. Energy savings obviously are a benefit to the property owner. Our program has what we call an eligible measures list, where it has standards for each type of improvement to make sure that it actually is going to be an energy improvement for that property. They can't choose sort of the lowest air conditioner available. They have to get Energy Star. As I said, there could be potential insurance savings, and many people like that there is a quick approval process. So some financing can take a long time. This one is known for being fairly quick. There are also differences in this kind of financing. So because it's off balance sheet, as they say, it is not likely to affect your credit. The maximum repayment term is often longer than many other financing tools available. It can go up to 30 years. It's determined by the life of the improvement. So an air conditioner will have a shorter lifespan than a solar system. You know, all of that is taken into account when they determine how long that PACE assessment will be on your bill. I mentioned no prepayment penalties. They don't have upfront costs. As I said, the contractor gets paid after the work is done. You don't pay anything until your first assessment at the end of the year. Let's see, they do have fixed interest rates, and there are some debates about whether that interest may be deductible. So we absolutely are not saying it is. You should talk to your tax professional about that. But it has been discussed. So what are the limitations? What are the risks that people should be aware of? The first is that these interest rates are not low. They are between 6 and 9%, and then there are fees on top of that. So some people think that because it is a program that has been enabled by the government, that it somehow has incentives attached to that or lower interest rates, and it doesn't. It's market rate. So there are higher interest rate products out there, and there are lower interest rate products out there, and we want to make sure that you're finding the one that's best for you. Qualifying for PACE does not guarantee that you will actually be able to pay for it. Unlike more rigorous financial products, mortgages that do a really detailed analysis into your ability to pay it, this does not. It is attached to the house, not necessarily your own financial status. So it is your individual responsibility to be sure that you actually will be able to pay this back. And then it certainly could affect the sale or the refinancing of your property, and this is really important. Many mortgage companies are not fans of PACE financing, and they may not be willing to accept the PACE lien when the property changes hands. When this was first established, that was actually one of the benefits that were promoted, that it was meant to just stay with the property, right? The improvement stays with the property. And so PACE was designed so that the financing actually would just convey to the next person. Because of that financial company objection, that is for the most part not happening. It usually is going to need to be paid off at the point of sale, and that includes at the point of refinancing. So you need to be prepared that if you need to sell the property or refinance it, you have to incorporate that repayment into that plan. There is a requirement by the state that sellers inform the buyers of this PACE assessment when they're listing their property. And in the most serious of examples, failure to pay could result in the loss of the property. Just like if you don't pay your property taxes for any other reason, if you don't pay your property taxes that now have a PACE lien on them, there's a process that you go through to ultimately end up in a tax sale, and it could be sold. So this is a very detailed explanation of how that works. I won't go into it because hopefully no one will be in that position, but it's really important for people to understand that risk. So our policy was very conscious of those risks and wanted to be sure that the customers were as protected as they could be while still allowing for this market approach. So we focused a lot on transparency and enforceability. We looked to best practices from across the country and our colleagues across the state. And we added consumer protections. I want to highlight a few of them. The first is that transparency. That notice to property owner, NTPO, is a document that we require that they wouldn't necessarily do otherwise. It's a summary document of those main financial points that you need to know. How much is being assessed? What's the annual payment going to be? What's your interest rate? What's the total amount that you're going to be paying? So that separate summary document is something we've created so that it's really clear what people are getting into. We also required some customer service and complaint procedures, as well as contractor management and those limitations on marketing and price standards. So the PACE organization has to set reasonable market-based price standards so that there's not gouging among their contractors. We also added additional qualifying criteria for residential properties. So in terms of who's eligible, no one, whether they're residential, commercial, can have delinquent property taxes, involuntary liens, defaults, or bankruptcy within a certain number of years. If those are met, residential properties also have to meet one of the 4 additional requirements that are listed. Most of the PACE providers are using that 4th one, that you have to have 10% equity in the home. And when you add the mortgage payment and the PACE, when you add the mortgage and the PACE lien, that total can't be more than the value of the property. So you can't then go into negative equity by adding the PACE lien. So that's very complicated, and it's not really on you to determine that. The PACE provider will do it, but just so you know, there are these extra qualification steps that we tried to add to address that ability to pay question. So in the county, our role is just to educate residents like we're doing today. We also check in with the PACE providers annually to make sure that they are addressing complaints and have provided all the reporting that's necessary. And then the cities review the metrics we provide to them and have the opportunity to opt out if they determine it's not right for their residents. So that's the basics on PACE, and I certainly will take questions in a second, but I want to give the big picture of what else can you do to finance these types of improvements. Like I said earlier, the best bet is always going to be cash from a total cost perspective, but there's always reasons that you might want to finance things. And so one other option is home equity loans. They tend to be in the sort of 4 to 9%, so probably have a lower interest rate, but they have equity requirements. The term can be shorter. So there are some things about that that are not, that have some cons as well. There's a program called Home Style Energy Mortgage Loans. These are basically a second mortgage, but specifically for energy efficiency products. And you can finance more than the value of your home so that you then have the money to do these energy upgrades. So I have honestly never known anyone who took advantage of this program, but it's out there. If you can find a financer to provide it for you, it is an interesting approach. There are also some unsecured loans, and I just have an example listed here that I looked into. These are sort of over-the-counter kind of loan products. The interest rate between 7 and 10%. They have shorter terms, but then they are due at sale, but you don't need equity for them. So that is another option. The Solar Energy Loan Fund, there's a link in there that you'll get when I send you the slides, is another, they're actually a nonprofit that focuses on solar and energy projects and provides financing to veterans and women, and have these sort of niche products that might be interesting. And then many contractors offer consumer loans, but they tend to have higher interest rates. And then lastly, for low-income residents, the Office of Housing and Community Development within Sarasota County does offer loans for rehabilitation of homes that are, might have a hole in the roof or really struggling to pay for the kinds of improvements that are necessary. And these are zero interest loans that don't have to be paid until the home is sold. But they do have very steep qualifying requirements in terms of income. So the basic message here is that you have options, and PACE is one of those options, but it may not be the best. And we really encourage you to do your homework, look at all the tools that are out there, and figure out what might be best for your project. Generally, the best sort of financial guidance is you want to try to find the shortest term you can afford at the lowest interest rate that you can get, and certainly don't finance something longer than the item itself will last. So we have a PACE section of our county sustainability website. You'll see, you just go to sdgov.net/sustainability, and then there's a PACE line there, and this is the direct link. And it has much of what I've discussed today. It has a list of the 4 providers with links to their websites, and it also has a very detailed frequently asked questions document. I think it's 9 pages now. That is very helpful. So you can sort of scan those questions once you get into it further, and it's pretty likely those answers are in there somewhere. So that's the basics. I'm very open to your questions and ideas. You are welcome.
I would have some questions, Lee Hayes, but I think they tend to be, after hearing your presentation, less about PACE and
Okay.
probably more about solar. So did you say you folks do a solar workshop?
We do, yeah. It is even more PowerPoint heavy. We go the full hour and we dig into it in detail. And I can follow up with you to share when the next class is. And if that's not soon enough, I think I have a video of that class, and I can also just chat with you offline if that's helpful, because I know condos are very unique and might need some just brainstorming and back and forth on that. So let's
Sure.
see if there are questions about PACE from others, and then if you want to stay on, I can also just keep talking with you about that.
Great, that'd be great.
Okay. Does anyone have questions about PACE or about these other financing options? So there's a question that says, does the homeowner pick the third-party administrator? It's a good question. You can, although normally the way it works is you find the contractor, and the contractor tells you which of the administrators they're a party to. So you can go either way. If you're interested in comparing the financing, I would go to our website and click on each of the third-party administrators, and you can then find contractors through them because they have listings of their contractors. So that's one way to find a contractor that you know offers PACE, right? But if you have a contractor you like, or several contractors you want to get quotes from, one question to ask them is, do you offer PACE, or sort of what other financing would you offer? So there's two ways to do it. Some contractors have relationships with multiple PACE providers, but that's not the norm. So oftentimes you'll be limited either way, depending on which contractor you pick or which provider you pick. I hope that makes sense.